The Raven Creek Raiders thought they ruled the frontier with impunity. They'd carved their bloody reputation through ruthless violence and calculated terror, leaving shattered lives across 3 territories. But on a snow-covered winter night, they made a fatal miscalculation that would become whispered legend around campfires for generations to come. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first flickers of dawn painted the eastern sky as Eleanor Blackwood completed her morning rounds with methodical precision. Her movements were deliberate and focused, boots making barely a whisper against the freshly fallen snow. To any observer, she appeared to be an ordinary widow tending to her modest homestead on the outskirts of Whispering Pines. Just another resilient soul starting her day in the harsh wilderness of the Montana Territory. But Eleanor never stopped observing her surroundings. She spotted the subtle disturbance in the snow near her western fence line. The 3rd time this week, she'd noticed unfamiliar tracks circling her property's boundary. Different men, same pattern of movement, always keeping to the shadows of the tree line. Raven Creek Raiders. They were growing bolder. Inside her cabin, the fire had already been stoked, its warmth filling the sturdy log structure. Eleanor poured herself a cup of strong coffee, her movements fluid and economical, as she gazed out the frost-covered window toward the tree line. The calendar on her wall showed the date, February 12, 1876, circled in red. Today marked exactly 1 year since Thomas's murder. She touched the worn wedding band she still wore, allowing herself 5 seconds of remembered grief before compartmentalizing the emotion away. The Raiders had given her exactly 52 weeks to mourn. Now it was time for other matters. The weathered journal in her drawer contained her latest observations. Eleanor retrieved it, adding new notations with precise handwriting. She moved to the main room, where a modest shelf held family keepsakes, her quiet life meticulously crafted over 3 years in Whispering Pines. Eleanor and Thomas Blackwood, the reserved couple who'd moved from back east to start a small cattle ranch. No children, few close friends, nothing remarkable about them. But behind that carefully constructed facade lay something else entirely. Eleanor reached beneath a loose floorboard near the hearth, pressing a concealed mechanism that caused a hidden compartment to slide open. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, filled with handwritten notes, hand-drawn maps of the region, and detailed sketches taken over months of careful observation. The Raven Creek Raiders' hideouts, movements, and operations were documented with professional precision. Faces, names, schedules, all catalogued with the methodical care of someone who'd spent decades in a world far removed from this frontier outpost. She reviewed her notes one final time. Jackson Raven, the gang's ruthless leader, had expanded their territory aggressively. In the past 18 months, what had started as petty thievery had evolved into something more organized. Bank robberies, protection schemes, and land seizures along the territory's main trading routes. Eleanor's homestead was the final piece they needed to control the valley's northern access to the mountains, the most direct route between the territorial capital and the Canadian border, with minimal law enforcement presence and ideal terrain for moving stolen goods. Thomas had discovered their operation accidentally, stumbling upon their camp while tracking a wounded stag in the far woods. 2 days later, he was dead. A tragic accident, according to Sheriff Mills, his body found at the bottom of Widow's Gorge with a broken neck. But Eleanor had recognized the signature immediately. The horse tracks around the scene told a different story to those who knew how to read them. A deliberate ambush made to look like a tragic misstep to anyone but the most trained observer. The familiar calm settled over her as she reached deeper into the hidden compartment, removing a false bottom to reveal what lay beneath. A custom-crafted Winchester rifle with specialized modifications, a leather case containing various tools of her former trade, and a tarnished badge from a life she'd left behind. She checked the weapon with practiced efficiency, then returned everything to its hiding place. The sound of approaching hoofbeats triggered her awareness. Eleanor closed the hidden compartment and moved to the kitchen, assuming the role she'd perfected, the grieving widow, vulnerable and alone. Sheriff Mills's horse came to a stop by her front porch. He was right on schedule, exactly as her intelligence had predicted. The pattern recognition that had kept her alive during 15 years as a Pinkerton detective had become her most valuable tool in planning what would come next. Eleanor watched through the kitchen window as Mills adjusted his gun belt and hat, the practiced movements of a man who'd spent 20 years in frontier law enforcement. What most people didn't know was that for the last 3 of those years, a significant portion of his income had come from Jackson Raven. "Morning, Eleanor," Mills called as she opened the door, his tone carefully calibrated to project official concern. "Thought I'd stop by, check how you're holding up today. Been a year now, hasn't it?" "That's thoughtful of you, Sheriff," Eleanor replied, her voice carrying just the right amount of lingering grief. "Coffee's fresh, if you'd like some." She led him into the kitchen, noting how his eyes scanned the room, not for threats, but for valuables, for signs of her financial situation. Eleanor poured him coffee in a chipped mug, playing her part flawlessly. "I know today must be difficult," Mills said, settling his substantial frame into a chair that creaked under his weight. "Thomas was well liked around these parts." "Yes, he was," she replied softly, allowing a calculated pause. "It's been a challenging year." Mills sipped his coffee, watching her over the rim of his mug. "Been meaning to talk to you about something. Eleanor, there's been some interest in your property, and there it was, right on cue. Might be a good time to consider selling, given the circumstances." Eleanor allowed her voice to waver slightly. "This was our dream, Sheriff. Thomas and I put everything we had into this place." "I understand that," Mills nodded with manufactured sympathy. "But a woman alone out here, it's a lot to manage. The wilderness ain't kind to solitary folk. The Raven Creek Development Company has made a generous offer. They're looking to expand cattle operations in the valley, create jobs. Progress is coming, whether we like it or not." Eleanor noted his use of "we," the practiced inclusivity of someone attempting to manipulate. She'd heard more convincing lies from cornered criminals. "Development company?" she questioned, injecting confusion into her tone. "Jackson Raven," Mills clarified. "Local businessman built himself up from nothing, got vision for the region." Eleanor allowed herself a small frown. "I've heard stories about the Ravens. Not all of them are flattering." A flash of annoyance crossed Mills's face before he masked it. "People talk, Eleanor. Successful men always have detractors. Ravens offering $800, well above market value." Eleanor rose to refill their coffee cups, using the movement to conceal her expression. $800 for property worth at least $3,000 given its strategic location. Thomas had understood the land's true value, which is why he'd insisted on purchasing it years ago when they were establishing their new lives. "I appreciate the information, Sheriff," she said, returning to the table, "but I'm not ready to make any decisions yet. This place, it's all I have left of Thomas." Mills's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The offer won't stay open indefinitely." "Eleanor, might be best to think about your future. Is that a suggestion, Sheriff, or a warning?" He blinked, recalibrating. She'd pushed just enough to test his reaction. "Just friendly advice from someone who cares about the welfare of everyone in this county. These mountains can get mighty dangerous for folks on their own." The threat was clear, if predictably cloaked in concern. Eleanor nodded, returning to her role of intimidated widow. "I'll give it some thought." Mills finished his coffee and stood. "You do that. Raven's a reasonable man, but business is business. He'll be in touch directly, I expect." After seeing the sheriff out, Eleanor watched his horse disappear down the snow-covered trail. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. She allowed herself the smallest of smiles. First phase complete. The official channels had been exhausted. Now the raiders would move to direct intimidation, just as her analysis had predicted. She returned to her hidden compartment, retrieving a small metal object. Moving methodically through the cabin and surrounding property, she checked each of the specialized defensive measures she'd prepared over the last month, ensuring everything was operational. Intricate contraptions concealed beneath innocent-looking features of the landscape. Tripwires hidden under fresh snow and precarious. Arrangements that could be triggered at precisely the right moment. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the valley as Eleanor moved to the back porch, gazing out at the landscape that had been her home for 3 years. It had taken time to adjust to the quiet life after decades of working for the Pinkerton agency, the stillness, the routine, the simple rhythms of frontier existence. Thomas had embraced it fully, finding peace in the distance they'd put between themselves and their former lives. She'd tried for his sake, and for a while it worked, until the Raven Creek Raiders murdered her husband. Eleanor touched her wedding ring again, remembering their last conversation. Thomas had known the risk of reporting what he'd seen to Sheriff. "Mills, we left that life behind, Ellie," he'd said. "We have to trust the law now." His conscience had cost him his life, and it had awakened something in Eleanor that had lain dormant for years. A dust cloud approached from the main trail. 3. Riders moving with purpose toward her property, right on schedule. The Raven Creek Raiders were nothing if not predictable in their escalation patterns. Eleanor moved inside, checking a small mirror she'd positioned to allow her to monitor approaches to the cabin. Then she positioned herself in the kitchen, appearing to be simply preparing dinner as 3 horses pulled into her yard. 6 men dismounted, led by Jackson Raven himself. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the easy confidence of someone used to getting his way through intimidation. Eleanor recognized his top lieutenants from her surveillance, brothers Ethan and Michael Donovan, ex-cavalry with dishonorable discharges, Ray Hawkins, former enforcer for a St. Louis gambling house, and 2 younger recruits eager to prove themselves. They approached her front door with practiced formation. Eleanor counted the visible weapons. At least 5 revolvers, 3 rifles, possibly more concealed, predictable. The heavy knock came as she was drying her hands on a kitchen towel. "Mrs. Blackwood," Jackson's deep voice carried through the door. "Jackson Raven. I believe Sheriff Mills mentioned I'd be stopping by." Eleanor took a measured breath, stepping fully into her role. She opened the door with slight hesitation, making herself appear smaller against Jackson's imposing frame. "Mr. Raven," she acknowledged. "The sheriff did mention something about development plans." Jackson smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "May we come in to discuss the opportunity? I promise we won't take much of your time." Eleanor noted how the men had already positioned themselves to prevent escape. 2 at the back of the cabin, others maintaining visual on approach. Routes professional, if somewhat obvious. "I suppose that would be all right," she said, allowing a nervous tremor in her voice. Jackson entered first, followed by the Donovan brothers. The others remained outside, establishing a perimeter. Eleanor led them to her living room, offering coffee that Jackson politely declined. "Mrs. Blackwood," Jackson began, his tone businesslike but cordial. "I'll be direct. Your property is the final piece in a significant regional development project. I'm prepared to offer you $800 cash, no questions asked, for immediate sale." Eleanor sat with her hands folded in her lap, the picture of a woman out of her depth. "That's very generous, Mr. Raven, but this ranch means a great deal to me. My husband and I—" "Your husband is gone, Mrs. Blackwood," Jackson interrupted, his voice hardening slightly. "And maintaining a property like this alone isn't just difficult, it can be dangerous." She allowed her eyes to widen slightly at the implied threat. What my associate means, Ethan Donovan interjected with practiced smoothness, is that frontier properties require significant upkeep and security. Accidents happen, equipment malfunctions, bandits looking for easy targets. Like, what happened to Thomas? Eleanor asked quietly, watching their reactions. A momentary tension filled the room. Jackson's expression flickered before settling back into practiced neutrality. Your husband's accident was a tragedy, he said carefully, one that highlights the dangers of isolation. Our offer provides you the means to relocate somewhere safer, perhaps closer to civilization. Eleanor rose and moved to the window, using the moment to scan the positions of the men outside. Everything proceeded exactly as anticipated. I have no family, Mr. Raven, she said, injecting vulnerability into her voice, and limited options. Even with your generous offer, starting over at my age wouldn't be easy. Jackson exchanged glances. With Heisman scenting weakness, he stood approaching Eleanor with what he clearly believed was reassuring confidence. Mrs. Blackwood, Eleanor, I understand your position. Perhaps we could discuss employment opportunities within our organization as part of the arrangement. Cooking, housekeeping perhaps. We take care of our own in this valley. Eleanor turned, allowing tears to well in her eyes. The perfect image of a desperate widow considering surrendering to intimidation. Could I have a few days to consider your offer? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. This is all so sudden. Jackson's expression hardened. I'm afraid time is a luxury we don't have. Trail conditions, business considerations. You understand? We need your answer today. Eleanor wrung her hands, the very picture of distress. I just don't know if I can decide something this important so quickly. Ethan Donovan moved closer, his patience visibly thinning. Mrs. Blackwood, I don't think you understand the situation. This isn't really a negotiation. What my brother means, Michael added, his tone deceptively gentle, is that we've already begun the development process. Workers hired, materials ordered. Delays would be problematic. Eleanor backed away, slightly playing her role to perfection. Are you threatening me, Mr. Donovan? Of course not, Jackson interjected smoothly. But reality is reality. Your property will be developed. The only question is whether you benefit from the arrangement or find yourself facing unfortunate circumstances. Through the window, Eleanor noticed 3 more riders approaching, right on time. Men in long coats with badges partially concealed, not local. The next phase was beginning. I think I need you to leave now, she said, allowing her voice to shake with what they would interpret as fear. Jackson sighed, nodding to the Donovan brothers. I had hoped we could resolve this amicably. Perhaps you need a more persuasive demonstration of our commitment to this project. As if on cue, Ray Hawkins entered from the kitchen where he'd slipped in through the back door. Boss, we've got company coming up the trail. 3 riders. Look like lawmen. Jackson frowned, moving to the window. Federal marshals. Who did you... Contact, Mrs. Blackwood. Eleanor backed toward the fireplace, where a concealed mechanism was installed beneath the mantel. Not that she needed it. Everything was proceeding according to her meticulous plan. I haven't contacted anyone, she insisted, the tremor in her voice now genuine seeming. I don't understand what's happening. Jackson turned to his men, his expression hardening. Change of plans. Mrs. Blackwood is coming with us until we sort this out. Ethan, secure her. Ray, tell the others to prepare for visitors. Eleanor allowed Ethan to grab her arm roughly, suppressing her instinct to counter the move with techniques that would have left him incapacitated. Now was not the time. She needed to be inside their operation, and this was the most efficient. Root, please, she begged as Ethan bound her wrists with a leather strap. Don't do this. I'll sign whatever you want. Too late for that, Jackson said coldly. You've complicated things, Mrs. Blackwood. Now we do this the hard way. Through the window, Eleanor could see the marshals stopping at the edge of her property. 3 men dismounting with professional caution. "Out the back," Jackson ordered. "Michael, create a diversion if needed." As they hustled her through the kitchen toward the rear door, Eleanor allowed herself to be manhandled, maintaining the appearance of terrified compliance. She took special note of which path they were taking, mentally marking each step against the map she had committed to memory, the map of every trap she had meticulously set throughout her property over the past weeks. As they reached the back door, Eleanor stumbled deliberately, seeming to catch her foot on the threshold. The momentary confusion allowed her just enough time to hook her boot against a nearly invisible wire running along the baseboard. Outside, they moved quickly to the waiting horses. Eleanor was forced onto a mount, positioned between Ethan and another raider. Jackson took the lead, issuing rapid orders as they prepared to ride out. As they pulled away, using a hidden trail through the northern section of her property, Eleanor caught a glimpse of the marshals approaching her cabin. Right on schedule. Marshal James Harrington and his deputies from the federal office, not here to rescue her, but to monitor and provide backup, only if absolutely necessary. Because this was her operation now, her plan, her justice. Just as they cleared the first line of trees, a tremendous crash echoed from behind them. The first of Eleanor's traps had been triggered, collapsing a carefully weakened section of her barn's roof. Not meant to harm, but to create confusion and delay any pursuit. "What the hell was that?" Ethan growled, turning in his saddle. "Keep moving," Jackson ordered. "It's just a distraction." As the horses bounced along the rough forest trail, Eleanor allowed herself to be jostled about, maintaining the appearance of a terrified hostage. Inside, however, a familiar calm had settled over her, the operational clarity she'd relied on. During her years as the Pinkerton Agency's most effective detective, the Raven Creek Raiders had just made their first critical mistake. They thought they were taking a hostage to pressure her into selling her land. In reality, Eleanor Blackwood had just infiltrated their organization exactly as she'd planned, precisely 1 year to the day after they'd murdered her husband. And they were riding directly into the heart of her carefully prepared killing ground, a landscape she had spent weeks transforming into a deadly maze of ingenious traps. The forest thickened as the raiders pushed deeper into the mountain terrain, following game trails that few outsiders knew existed. Eleanor mentally charted their course, recognizing landmarks she had carefully studied during her months of preparation. They were heading northwest toward Raven's Hollow, the hidden canyon that housed the raiders' main compound. Jackson Raven rode at the front, his broad form silhouetted against the waning afternoon light. Eleanor observed his communication style, terse hand signals, measured pace changes, strategic positioning of his men. This was someone with formal combat experience, not the undisciplined outlaw she'd initially expected when beginning her investigation. "Keep alert," Jackson called back to his men. "Those marshals weren't here by accident." Eleanor bounced uncomfortably on her horse, the leather bindings cutting into her wrists as she maintained her facade of frightened submission. Ethan Donovan kept a firm grip on her reins, occasionally casting suspicious glances her way. She avoided his gaze, instead focusing on counting landmarks and timing their journey. 2 hours from her property, the riders slowed as they approached a narrow passage between granite outcroppings. A natural choke point that would be impossible to navigate except in single file. Eleanor felt a surge of anticipation. The first of her distant traps lay just beyond this pass. As the lead rider entered the passage, Eleanor subtly shifted, her weight pretending to adjust her uncomfortable position while actually loosening the leather bindings around her wrists. Years of practice had taught her how to manipulate restraints, creating slack where none appeared to exist. "Something ain't right," Ray Hawkins muttered as they emerged from the passage into a small clearing. "Trails too quiet. No birds." Eleanor kept her expression neutral while inwardly appreciating the man's instincts. He was right to be concerned. though not for the reasons he suspected. The silence wasn't from marshals lying in wait. It was from the subtle preparations she'd made. 3 days earlier, applying a special mixture to the surrounding trees that repelled wildlife, Jackson raised his hand, halting the group. Check the perimeter. 2 riders split off, circling the clearing's edge. Eleanor counted silently. 3, 2, 1, oh. Thunderous crack split the air as a massive deadfall trap activated, sending a lightning-struck pine crashing down. It missed the riders but effectively cut off the trail behind them, blocking any easy pursuit from the marshals. "Ambush!" Ethan shouted, drawing his revolver. "Hold!" Jackson commanded, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the tree line. That was no ambush. Tree was rigged, but there's no one firing at us. His tactical assessment impressed Eleanor despite herself. Most men would have emptied their guns into the forest in panic. Could be marshals trying to trap us, force us another. "Away," Ray suggested, his hand resting nervously on his holster. Jackson shook his head. Or it could be unrelated. Trappers sometimes rig deadfalls for large game. Eleanor allowed a convincing tremble to run through her body, playing the terrified hostage, while inwardly mapping their altered course. The deadfall had done its job, not to harm, but to eliminate their original path, forcing them toward the route she had prepared with far more dangerous surprises. "We take the North Fork," Jackson decided after a moment. "Michael, take point. Ethan, keep tight hold of our guest. She's our insurance if those marshals are tracking us." The group reorganized, changing formation as they continued their journey. Eleanor noted how efficiently they adapted to the change in plans. Further, evidence of their military background. They weren't simple bandits, but organized veterans who had brought their battlefield experience to criminal enterprise. As they approached a swift-flowing stream, Eleanor recognized the next critical juncture in her plan. The crossing ahead had been carefully prepared 3 weeks ago, subtle alterations to the stream bed that weren't visible but would dramatically affect any crossing attempt. "Stream's running high," Michael observed as they reached the bank. "Spring melts come early this year." "We cross here," Jackson ordered. "Standard formation." Eleanor watched as the first 2 raiders entered the water, their horses picking their way carefully across the rocky bottom. When they reached the midpoint, she tensed imperceptibly, waiting. Michael's horse suddenly reared, nearly throwing its rider as its hoof slipped into a carefully excavated pocket in the stream bed. The animal recovered, but the momentary chaos caused another rider's mount to panic, slipping on the algae-slicked rocks Eleanor had transplanted from elsewhere on the stream. "Control your mounts," Jackson barked, his face darkening with anger as his men struggled to manage their frightened horses. Eleanor maintained her fearful expression while inwardly tracking each reaction. The stream crossing wasn't designed to injure, merely to create tension, elevate stress, make them question the reliability of familiar trails. Psychological warfare was often more effective than direct confrontation. Once across, the raiders paused to regroup. Eleanor noticed Michael examining his horse's leg, concern etched on his weathered face. "She's favoring her right front," he reported to Jackson. "Something cut her fetlock." Jackson dismounted to inspect the injury. Metal shard embedded in the hoof, man-made, not natural. His eyes found Eleanor, suspicion darkening his gaze. "Strange coincidence, Mrs. Blackwood. First a deadfall, now sabotage crossing." Eleanor summoned tears, her voice quavering. "I don't understand what's happening. Please, just let me go. I'll sign over my property. Whatever you want." Her performance was convincing enough that Jackson's suspicion wavered. Trappers' traps, most likely. These mountains have eyes, especially near the border. Ray wasn't so easily convinced. "Seems mighty convenient, Jackson. Dead husband found at Widow's Gorge, federal marshals showing up right when we arrive, and now trapped trails." The tension among the raiders grew palpable, another small victory in Eleanor's strategy. Creating discord within their ranks would make them increasingly unpredictable to each other. while remaining entirely predictable to her. "We continue," Jackson declared, ending the discussion. "The hollow is 2 hours north. We make camp at Blackthorn Ridge for the night." Eleanor's spirits lifted at this news. Blackthorn Ridge was the centerpiece of her trap network, a location she had spent more time preparing than any other. The raiders couldn't have chosen a more perfect place to seal their fate. The terrain grew steeper as afternoon faded toward evening. The horses labored up rocky inclines as shadows lengthened across the forest floor. Eleanor feigned exhaustion, slumping in her saddle while actually taking careful note of each landmark. A lightning-scarred oak, a distinctive boulder formation, a trickling spring, all markers she had memorized, all places where she had left her deadly handiwork. As twilight descended, they reached a small plateau nestled between rocky outcroppings. Blackthorn Ridge, named for the twisted trees that clung tenaciously to its edges. "Make camp," Jackson ordered. "Michael, see to the horses. Ray, perimeter check. Ethan, secure our guest." Eleanor was roughly pulled from her horse, her legs nearly buckling as they touched ground. The act wasn't entirely performance. Hours in the saddle with bound hands had left her genuinely stiff. Ethan led her to a gnarled blackthorn tree, securing her bonds to a low-hanging branch. "Don't get any ideas," he warned, tightening the leather with unnecessary force. "Ain't nothing out there but wolves and wildcats who'd find a woman alone mighty appetizing." Eleanor kept her eyes downcast, portraying appropriate fear while surreptitiously testing her bonds. Perfect. He had tied her exactly where she'd hoped, within reach of a hollow in the tree trunk where she had hidden emergency supplies weeks earlier. As the men established camp, Eleanor observed their routine. Disciplined, efficient, each man knowing his role without needing instruction, Ray returned from his perimeter check, reporting no signs of pursuit. Michael tended the horses, removing saddles and checking for injuries. The younger recruits gathered firewood and prepared a small cook fire, shielded from distant observation by the ridge's natural contours. Jackson approached Eleanor, carrying a tin cup of water. He crouched before her, studying her face with cold calculation. "You've caused quite a disruption to our plans, Mrs. Blackwood," he said, holding the cup to her lips so she could drink. Eleanor took small sips, playing the role of the grateful captive. "I never meant to cause trouble. I just wanted to honor my husband's memory by keeping our home." "Noble sentiment," Jackson acknowledged, "but ultimately futile. The territory is changing. Men like me are shaping its future. By stealing land and threatening widows." The words slipped out before she could stop them, a calculated risk to gauge his reaction. Rather than anger, Jackson's lips curled into an amused smile. "A perspective, Mrs. Blackwood, not the full picture. We bring order to chaos, create opportunity where none existed. The law can't tame these territories. They lack the will and the means. And you have both? In abundance." Jackson stood, towering over her. "Rest while you can. Tomorrow we reach the hollow, and your future becomes considerably more structured." As darkness claimed the camp, the raiders maintained their vigilance. 2 men always on watch, rotating shifts established with military precision. Eleanor remained still, controlling her breathing, waiting for the deep night when her plan could advance. Near midnight, when the fire had burned to embers and only Ray Hawkins remained awake on guard duty, Eleanor made her move. With fingers made nimble through years of practice, she extracted a thin metal pick from the hem of her dress, a precaution she'd sewn in long before today's events. Within moments, she had created enough slack in her bonds to reach the hollow. In the tree behind her, her fingers found what she sought, a small leather pouch containing essential tools. Moving with exquisite care, she loosened her restraints further, not enough to free herself, but enough to implement the next phase of her plan. Ray's back was to her as he stared out into the darkness beyond the camp's perimeter. Eleanor removed a small glass vial from the pouch, uncorking it with practiced fingers. The contents, a potent sleeping draught she had prepared from locally gathered herbs, would be her first active countermeasure against her captors. The raiders' water barrel sat just 10 feet away, positioned downwind from their sleeping forms. Eleanor waited for Ray to complete his scheduled patrol of the perimeter, another predictable element of their routine. When he moved to the opposite side of camp, she slipped the contents of the vial into the water, stirring it with a thin twig to distribute the tasteless compound. By the time Ray returned to his post, Eleanor was back in her original position, bonds appearing unchanged, her breathing deep and even as if in troubled sleep. The trap had been set. Dawn broke with pale light filtering through the pines. Eleanor watched through half-lidded eyes as the raiders stirred from their bedrolls. As anticipated, each man took deep draughts from the water barrel before beginning their morning preparations. Within 20 minutes, the effects became evident: sluggish movements, dulled reflexes, intermittent confusion. "Something ain't right," Michael muttered, rubbing his temples. "Head's foggy." Poor sleep, Jackson dismissed, though Eleanor noted he moved with less precision than the previous day. "Break camp, we move in 10 minutes. The raiders struggled through their morning routine, taking nearly twice as long as they should have. Eleanor maintained her role as the frightened captive, while inwardly calculating how the draft would affect their journey. Not enough to incapacitate, she needed them functional enough to reach their compound, but sufficient to dull their senses and slow their reactions. Ethan untied her from the tree, his movements clumsy compared to his usual efficiency. "On your feet," he growled, frustration evident in his voice as he fumbled with the ropes. Once mounted, the group descended from Blackthorn Ridge toward a dense valley below. Eleanor knew what awaited them. A narrow ravine she had spent days preparing, with an elaborate system of traps designed not to kill, but to separate and disorient. As they entered the ravine, Jackson paused, a flicker of unease crossing his features. "Something's wrong," he murmured, surveying the steep walls rising on either side. Too late, Eleanor thought, as the first trap triggered. A carefully balanced rock slide activated as the lead horses crossed a hidden tripwire. Stones clattered down, not large enough to crush but sufficient to spook the already nervous animals. 2 horses reared, throwing their riders. Another bolted forward, separating from the group. "Ambush!" Michael shouted, drawing his pistol only to find his reaction slowed by the draft. "Hold position!" Jackson commanded, but his authority was undermined by the escalating chaos. Eleanor used the confusion to implement her next move. With a sharp kick to her horse's flanks, she sent the animal lurching forward, directly toward a section of ravine she knew was safe. Ethan, caught off guard by her sudden movement, lost his grip on her reins. "She's running," he shouted, spurring his mount to follow. Eleanor led her pursuers exactly where she wanted them, deeper into her killing ground. A second trap activated as Ethan crossed another trigger point. A hidden snare caught his horse's leg, sending both mount and rider tumbling to the rocky ground. The raiders were now split into 3 groups, Jackson and Michael trying to control the spooked horses at the ravine entrance, Ethan disabled on the ground, and the remaining men scattered in confusion as more traps activated in sequence. Eleanor guided her horse with knee pressure alone, her bound hands making conventional riding impossible. She headed not away from her captors, but toward a specific destination, a box canyon half a mile ahead that formed the centerpiece of her elaborate trap network. Behind her, she heard Jackson's voice rising above the chaos. "Regroup! She's heading for the North Canyon. Cut her off at the ridgeline." Exactly as she had planned, Eleanor urged her horse faster, allowing genuine urgency to fuel her pace. This wasn't an escape. It was a strategic repositioning, drawing the raiders exactly where she wanted them. The box canyon ahead had only one entrance, a fact that would appear to trap her, but actually place the raiders precisely where her most devastating traps awaited. As she burst into the canyon, Eleanor quickly dismounted, sending her horse toward the back wall with a sharp slap to its flank. Then she moved to a specific boulder formation she had prepared weeks earlier, slipping into a hidden crevice that would conceal her from immediate view. Within minutes, Jackson and 3 of his men charged into the canyon, weapons drawn, faces dark with anger. "Spread out," Jackson ordered. "She's on foot now, can't have gone far." The men dispersed, searching the canyon floor while failing to look up at the elaborate network of ropes, counterweights, and deadly implements Eleanor had positioned among the high rocks. Eleanor reached into the crevice, finding the primary trigger mechanism, a simple lever that would initiate a cascade of destruction. She hesitated, not from doubt, but to time the sequence perfectly. The remaining raiders would be entering the canyon soon, drawn by the commotion. Ray Hawkins was the first to sense the trap. He stopped suddenly, eyes scanning the canyon walls. "Jackson," he called, voice tight with warning, "something ain't right here." Jackson followed his gaze upward, comprehension dawning too late. "Pull back," he shouted. "It's a—" Eleanor pulled. The lever. What followed was a symphony of destruction as dozens of traps activated in carefully timed sequence. Deadfalls crashed down, blocking the canyon entrance. Snares yanked men off their feet. Carefully balanced rock formations collapsed, creating chaos without delivering immediate death. Not yet. Death would come, but on her terms, after they understood exactly who had engineered their downfall. As the dust settled, the surviving raiders found themselves trapped, disarmed, and separated from one another by Eleanor's elaborate mechanisms. Jackson alone remained relatively unharmed, pinned between 2 massive boulders that restricted his movement without crushing him. Eleanor emerged from her hiding place, shrugging off her bonds with ease, now that pretense was unnecessary. From another hidden cache, she retrieved her Winchester rifle and approached Jackson with measured steps. Recognition dawned in his eyes as she drew near, followed by disbelief. "You," he whispered. "This was all you." Eleanor smiled, cold and precise, as the mechanical trap she had created. "From the moment your men killed Thomas, this outcome was inevitable." "You're no widow," Jackson accused, struggling against his stone prison. "No homesteader could have engineered this." "I am very much a widow," Eleanor corrected, checking her rifle with practiced efficiency. "Thanks to you. But before I was a wife, I was something else entirely." Understanding transformed Jackson's expression. "Pinkerton," he breathed, the word part accusation, part realization. Eleanor neither confirmed nor denied, instead circling to where she could address all the surviving raiders. "1 year ago today, you murdered my husband because he witnessed your operation. You thought you were eliminating a simple threat. Instead, you created something far worse." Ray spat blood from his position where a snare held him suspended painfully against the canyon wall. "What are you planning, woman, to kill us all?" "Eventually," Eleanor acknowledged with chilling calm. "But not yet. First, we're going to your compound. There are ledgers there I need, records of every crime, every collaboration, every corrupt official in your network." She turned back to Jackson. "And you're going to give me everything I want, because the alternative is dying slowly in this. A canyon where no one will find you until spring thaw." Jackson's laugh held no humor. "You think my men at the compound will just let you walk in? There are 20 more raiders waiting." Eleanor's smile remained coldly confident. "I'm counting on it. Why do you think I let you take me? A frontal assault on your compound would be challenging, even for someone with my skills. But delivering me as your prisoner, that places me exactly where I need to be." "You won't succeed," Jackson warned. "Even if you get inside, you're one against many." "Numbers mean nothing when the battlefield is prepared," Eleanor replied. "And Make no mistake, Mr. Raven. I've been preparing your compound for weeks. Every water barrel, every ammunition cache, every escape route. My handiwork is already in place, waiting to be activated. For the first time, Eleanor saw genuine fear in Jackson Raven's eyes, the realization that he hadn't captured a helpless widow, but had instead fallen into the elaborate trap of a predator far more dangerous than himself. Now, Eleanor continued, efficiently binding Jackson with ropes from her cache, we're going to have a conversation about exactly how we'll present ourselves when we arrive at your compound. Your men will see exactly what they expect, their victorious leader returning. With his captive, she secured the final knot with expert precision. They won't realize until it's far too late that you're actually my prisoner, delivering me exactly where I need to be to dismantle everything you've built. Eleanor checked the position of the sun. Midday, perfect timing for the next phase of her plan. The marshals will find your men here, she informed the trapped raiders. Those that survive, at least. I've left enough evidence to ensure they understand your organization's full scope. She turned back to Jackson, who watched her. With a newfound wariness, you thought taking a widow hostage was your simplest solution. Instead, it will be your final mistake. The trap setter had sprung her most elaborate snare, and the predators who had hunted her now found themselves thoroughly, fatally caught. The approach to Raven's Hollow came in late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. Eleanor rode beside Jackson, her posture deliberately slumped, wrists bound with ropes that appeared secure but concealed carefully crafted quick-release mechanisms. Jackson's hands gripped the reins with white-knuckled tension, superficially. In control, but acutely aware of the knife Eleanor had pressed against his kidney, hidden from view beneath her shawl. "Remember," she whispered as the first sentries came into view, "one wrong word, and you won't live to regret it." Jackson's jaw tightened, but he nodded imperceptibly. The compound revealed itself as they crested the final ridge, a collection of sturdy log structures nestled in a natural depression, protected on three sides by steep cliffs and accessed only through a narrow pass. A defensive position that would have been virtually impregnable to frontal assault, precisely why Eleanor had chosen infiltration instead. "Boss returning," a sentry called out, triggering a flurry of activity within the compound. Eleanor took stock of the defenses with a professional eye. 8 men visible on guard duty, firing positions established along the upper ridgeline. At least 3 separate structures forming the core of the compound, with smaller outbuildings scattered throughout. Exactly as her intelligence had suggested, though seeing it firsthand allowed her to confirm crucial details. "Smile," she murmured to Jackson as they approached the main gate. "Your men need to believe you're bringing back a valuable hostage, not delivering your own executioner." Jackson managed a reasonable facsimile of his usual confident expression as they rode into the compound. Men gathered around, faces showing curiosity and cruel anticipation at the sight of Eleanor's bound form. "Successful negotiation?" called a heavy-set man with a lieutenant's bearing, whom Eleanor immediately identified as Samuel Wade, Jackson's second-in-command. "Complications," Jackson replied, his voice admirably steady. "The rest of the boys are handling a marshal problem. Mrs. Blackwood has agreed to be our guest while we resolve some property matters." Wade approached, studying Eleanor with predatory interest. "Quite accommodating of her, especially considering how stubborn she's been about selling." "Amazing how persuasive the right incentives can be," Jackson responded, carefully following Eleanor's scripted answers. "Have Riley prepare the storehouse room. Mrs. Blackwood will be staying there until matters are settled." Wade gestured toward one of the smaller buildings, "already set up after you sent word you were bringing her in. Though we expected more of the boys with you." Change of plans. Jackson dismounted, then turned to help Eleanor down as would be expected. The moment allowed her to whisper a final warning as her lips passed near his ear. "Remember, I've prepared. For every contingency, your men are already dead, they just don't know it yet." Inside the compound, Eleanor maintained her facade of fearful submission while cataloguing every detail. Water barrels positioned exactly where she'd been told they would be, each one visited weeks earlier by her operative and treated with compounds that only needed activation, ammunition stores in the expected location, escape routes, guard rotations, communication methods, all matching her intelligence perfectly. Wade and 2 guards escorted them toward the storehouse, a solid structure that likely once served as a trapper's cabin before the raiders claimed this territory. Eleanor noted the heavy door, the barred windows, a prison cell disguised as storage. "Didn't expect you back so soon," Wade commented to Jackson as they walked. "Thought capturing the widow and dealing with those marshals would take longer?" Jackson's momentary hesitation was imperceptible to anyone but Eleanor. Marshals were more persistent than expected. "Sent the boys to lead them north, while I brought her in directly." "Smart," Wade nodded approvingly. "Ethan and Michael handling it?" "Along with Ray and the new boys," Jackson confirmed, following Eleanor's prepared narrative. "Should rejoin us by nightfall." Eleanor suppressed a cold smile. None of them would be returning, of course. By now, the federal marshals would have found the survivors of her canyon trap, gathering evidence and testimony that would implicate every corrupt official in the territory connected to the Ravens. They reached the storehouse, and Wade unlocked the heavy door. "Got her a cot, water bucket, basic hospitality." His laugh held no humor. "Though I expect her stay won't be comfortable once the boys get back. They've been talking about how to convince her to sign those property papers." Eleanor stumbled slightly. As they pushed her inside, a calculated move that allowed her to brush against the doorframe. Her fingers deposited a tiny metal device in a crack in the wood, the first of many measures she would implement within the compound. "Get some rest, Mrs. Blackwood," Jackson told her, his eyes communicating his understanding of the precarious position he occupied. "We'll discuss your future arrangements over dinner." The door slammed shut, the lock engaging with a heavy click. Eleanor immediately dropped her fearful posture, standing straight as she surveyed her prison. A small window with iron bars let in meager light, a rough cot against one wall, a bucket of water in the corner. Exactly as expected. She waited until the footsteps receded, then moved to the cot, feeling underneath until her fingers found what she sought. A small leather pouch secured to the underside with wax, placed there 3 weeks earlier by the young trapper she'd paid handsomely to work temporarily for the raiders. Inside was everything she needed. Lockpicks, a compact derringer, vials of compounds, and most importantly, a detailed map of the compound's underground escape tunnel. A secret passage known only to Jackson and his inner circle. Eleanor worked quickly, extracting what she needed before concealing the pouch again. First, she treated the water bucket with drops from one of her vials, a compound that would make her appear ill when consumed, but cause no permanent damage. Then she carefully examined the lock, memorizing its mechanism without attempting to pick it yet. Outside, she could hear the raiders preparing for evening, men talking, horses being tended, weapons cleaned. She counted voices, estimating numbers. 18, perhaps 20 men total. Significant odds, but not insurmountable with proper preparation. As dusk approached, footsteps returned to her door. The lock turned, and a young raider she didn't recognize entered carrying a tray with bread and stew. "Dinner," he announced curtly, placing the tray on the floor. "Boss says you're to eat. Keep your strength up." Eleanor had resumed her frightened widow persona, huddled on the cot with apparent fear. "Thank you," she whispered, adding a slight tremble to her voice. Could Could I have some fresh water? This bucket smells strange." The young man frowned but glanced at the bucket. "I'll tell Riley to bring some. Can't have you getting sick before you sign those papers." After he left, Eleanor allowed herself a small smile. Each interaction created new opportunities. She ate sparingly of the food, recognizing the importance of maintaining her strength while leaving enough to implement her next deception. An hour later, after consuming water from her treated bucket, she began her performance. Retching sounds, pained moans, just loud enough to be heard by the guard posted outside. It didn't take long for the door to open again. "What's all that racket?" demanded an older raider, lantern held high as he peered at Eleanor's huddled form. She lifted her head weakly, face carefully arranged to show pallor and distress. "The water," she gasped. "Something wrong with it." The man approached cautiously, examining the bucket. "Looks fine to me." "Please," Eleanor moaned. "I need a doctor. I think I'm dying." The guard hesitated, clearly uncertain how to proceed. A sick hostage wasn't part of the plan, particularly one whose signature they needed. "I'll get Wade," he decided finally. "Don't you go nowhere." He chuckled at his own joke, gesturing to her bound hands and the locked room. When the door closed, Eleanor immediately abandoned her sick act, moving swiftly to implement the next phase. She used the remains of her stew to create a convincing pool of vomit beside the cot, then resumed her pained posture just as multiple footsteps approached. The door swung open to reveal Wade and Jackson. Wade held his lantern high, illuminating Eleanor's huddled form and the mess beside her cot. "Damn it," Wade cursed. "What's wrong with her?" Jackson approached cautiously, playing his role perfectly. "Mrs. Blackwood, what's happened?" Eleanor fixed her gaze on Jackson, allowing recognition and desperate hope to show in her expression. "The water," she whispered. "Please, help me." Jackson turned to Wade. "We need her alive and coherent to sign those papers. Get Doc Sanders." "He's not back from Thornfield yet," Wade countered. "Won't be till morning." "Then put her in my cabin," Jackson ordered. "I can at least keep an eye on her condition until Sanders returns." Wade's expression showed suspicion. "Your cabin? Seems like special treatment for a hostage." "She's worth nothing to us dead," Jackson snapped with convincing irritation. "And if she's got some catching sickness, better to keep her isolated anyway." After a moment's hesitation, Wade nodded. "Fine. But she stays bound, and I'm posting extra guards." Two raiders helped Eleanor to her feet, supporting her seemingly weakened form as they escorted her across the compound to Jackson's cabin, a larger structure separated from the main buildings. Exactly where Eleanor needed to be to access the secret tunnel. Inside, the cabin was spartanly furnished, but clearly belonged to someone of authority. Maps covered one wall, a writing desk held ledgers and documents, and a locked chest sat at the foot of a sturdy bed. "Put her there," Jackson directed, pointing to a chair near the fireplace. "And bring fresh water and clean cloths." Wade positioned a guard outside the door before departing, promising to check back regularly. Once alone with Jackson, Eleanor straightened in her chair, dropping all pretense of illness. "The ledgers," she said quietly. "Where are they?" Jackson moved to the chest, unlocking it with a key from around his neck. "Everything's here, all the records you wanted, names, payments, operations. But it won't matter. My men will never let you leave here alive." Eleanor approached, examining the contents with satisfaction. Detailed records of every criminal operation, every bribed official, every stolen shipment, evidence that would dismantle not just the raiders, but the corrupt network that protected them. "Your men are the least of my concerns," she replied, moving to the fireplace. She knelt, feeling along the stones until she found the hidden latch her intelligence had identified. A section of the hearth slid aside, revealing the entrance to a narrow tunnel. Jackson watched with resignation. "How did you know about that? Only 3 living people knew that passage existed." 4, Eleanor corrected. Your former tunneler, McGrath, was quite informative before he died last winter. Amazing what people will reveal to a sympathetic nurse during their final days. She extracted documents from the chest, securing them inside her clothing. Now we have exactly 12 minutes before Wade returns to check on us. In that time, you'll show me how to access the ammunition storage and the main water supply. Jackson's laugh was bitter. And why would I help you destroy everything I've built? Eleanor's expression remained cold. Because the alternative is immediate death, while cooperation offers the possibility of survival. Not freedom, you'll answer for Thomas's murder, but perhaps a prison cell rather than a grave. Outside, the compound had grown quieter as night settled fully over Raven's Hollow. Most men would be gathered in the main hall for evening meals and gambling, another routine Eleanor had carefully studied. Under the constant threat of Eleanor's concealed derringer, Jackson led her through the secret tunnel that emerged behind. The stable, hidden from the sightlines of the guards. From there, they moved silently between shadows toward the ammunition storage, a small, heavily constructed building set apart from the main structures for safety. 2 guards, Jackson whispered as they observed from the darkness. As expected, Eleanor replied. She extracted a small clay sphere from her pouch, a special concoction of her own design. Create a distraction, something plausible that will draw them both away. Jackson hesitated only briefly before moving toward the edge of the shadows. "Hey!" he called out, his voice carrying authority. "Someone's messing with the horses! Get over there!" The guards exchanged glances before one peeled away toward the stables. The remaining guard stepped forward suspiciously. "Boss, what are you doing out here?" Before he could raise further alarm, Eleanor's clay sphere shattered at his feet, releasing a potent sleeping gas. The guard collapsed without a sound, and Eleanor moved swiftly to the ammunition storage door. "Open it," she commanded. Inside, the building contained exactly what she'd expected: rifles, revolvers, and most importantly, crates of ammunition. Working quickly, Eleanor applied a specialized compound to key ammunition supplies, not enough to be noticed, but sufficient to ensure that when fired, the treated rounds would misfire catastrophically. "Sabotaging your own men's weapons," Jackson observed, "cold-blooded even for a Pinkerton." "They forfeited any claim to mercy when they murdered my husband," Eleanor replied without emotion. "But unlike them, I'm offering you a choice. Continue cooperating, and you'll live to stand trial." Their next target was the water supply, barrels strategically positioned throughout the compound, fed by a central system. Eleanor had already treated many of them during previous covert visits, but the central system remained untouched. Under Jackson's increasingly reluctant guidance, they reached it without raising alarms. Eleanor worked methodically, adding measured drops of a clear liquid to the water. "This won't kill them," she explained as she worked, "but by morning every man who drinks from these barrels will be incapacitated, stomach cramps, weakness, confusion. Enough to ensure they can't mount an effective defense when the marshals arrive." "The marshals won't find this place," Jackson insisted. "Even if they captured some of my men, the approach is too well hidden." Eleanor smiled coldly. "They already know exactly where to come. I've been mapping routes to your compound for months. By dawn, Marshal Harrington and 20 federal agents will surround this hollow. They're only waiting for my signal." As they returned toward Jackson's cabin through the secret passage, a commotion erupted in the compound. Shouts, running footsteps, the sounds of rising alarm. "What's happening?" Jackson hissed. Eleanor cocked her head, listening. "Right on schedule. The first of your men are falling ill from the water barrels I treated weeks ago." "You've been poisoning us for weeks." Jackson's voice held equal parts horror and unwilling respect. "Preparing the battlefield," Eleanor corrected as they re-entered his cabin. "A principle I expect you remember from your military days." She secured Jackson to a chair, binding him with professional efficiency before checking her timepiece. In approximately 1 hour, the compound will be in chaos. Half your men incapacitated, the other half distracted by caring for them and trying to determine the cause. Eleanor moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains at the growing disorder outside. Men staggered between buildings. Others shouted for help or explanations. The careful organization of the raiders was disintegrating exactly as she had planned. When the marshals attack at dawn, she continued, they'll find minimal resistance. Those who can still fight will find their ammunition sabotaged, their escape routes blocked, their leadership either captured or in disarray. All this, Jackson said quietly, for one man. Your husband must have been remarkable. Eleanor's expression softened fractionally for the first time. He was. Thomas believed in justice, in law, in the possibility of leaving our former lives behind and starting fresh. Your men took that from him, from us, because he witnessed something he shouldn't have. She turned back from the window, her eyes hard again. Now I'll take everything from you. Outside, the chaos continued to spread as more raiders fell ill. Eleanor prepared the signal for the marshals, a simple mirror that would catch the first light of dawn, reflecting it in a specific pattern toward the hidden observation post on the eastern ridge. By this time tomorrow, she told Jackson, the Raven Creek Raiders will exist only in territorial history books, alongside other outlaw gangs that mistakenly believed themselves untouchable. She checked her preparations one final time as night deepened, and the sounds of confusion outside grew more pronounced. The trap-setter's work was nearly complete. By dawn, the elaborate snare she had spent a year designing would claim its final victims. The first hints of dawn painted the eastern sky in pale gold and crimson as Eleanor positioned herself at the cabin window. The compound had descended into chaos throughout the night. Moans of sickness echoed from multiple buildings, punctuated by terse commands from the few raiders still capable of leadership. Through careful observation, she counted just 7 men who remained unaffected by her treated water supply, including Wade, who stalked between buildings with growing panic etched on his weathered face. Your second in command seems distressed, Eleanor remarked to Jackson, who remained bound to the chair, watching her with a complex mixture of hatred and reluctant admiration. Water discipline was something you should have emphasized in your military training. Wade was never military, Jackson replied, shifting against his bonds. Saloon brawler who found his calling intimidating homesteaders. Effective in his way, but lacks strategic thinking. A weakness you're now paying for. Eleanor angled her small mirror, catching the first direct sunlight and directing it in a precise pattern toward the eastern ridge. 3 long flashes. 2 short, a signal that would trigger Marshal Harrington's carefully planned assault. The response came almost immediately. A brief glint of light from the concealed position. Confirmation received. The marshals were in position, their forces distributed according to the detailed maps Eleanor had provided. They'll show no mercy, she informed Jackson as she secured the mirror in place to maintain the signal. Harrington's brother was on. The stagecoach your men robbed last autumn. The driver who died was his friend. Jackson's expression remained stoic. We all have our vendettas, it seems. Eleanor turned from the window, approaching her captive with measured steps. I need something else from you before this ends. The location of my husband's personal effects. His watch, his journal, his wedding band. Your men took them after staging his accident. For the first time, genuine surprise showed on Jackson's face. We took nothing from your husband. The body was left as it fell. Your sheriff friend saw to that part. Eleanor studied his expression, her years of experience reading deception, telling her he spoke truth. Then Mills has more to answer for than just corruption. She made a mental note to add this to her evidence against the sheriff. Outside, Wade's A voice rose above the compound's disturbed morning rhythm. "Find the boss. Something's wrong with Jackson." Eleanor moved swiftly, retrieving her derringer from its hiding place. Time for the final act. She positioned herself beside the door, listening as booted feet approached at a run. The lock rattled and Wade burst in, revolver drawn. His eyes widened as he registered Jackson bound to the chair, then narrowed as he sensed movement behind. "Him? Don't!" Eleanor warned, pressing the derringer against the base of his skull. "Drop the gun." Wade froze, muscles tensing as he calculated his options. "You won't shoot. The noise would bring every man still standing." "An interesting theory," Eleanor replied calmly. "Care to test it? This derringer is loaded with special rounds. Minimal noise, maximum damage." After a moment's hesitation, Wade's revolver clattered to the floor. Eleanor kicked it away, then used practiced movements to secure his hands behind his back with leather bindings from her pouch. "Mrs. Blackwood has been playing us, Samuel," Jackson explained with resigned calm. "She's no helpless widow. Far from it." Wade's eyes blazed with fury. "You poisoned my men," he accused, struggling against his bonds. "Killed them like dogs." "Incapacitated," Eleanor corrected, securing him to a second chair. "The effects are temporary, unlike what your men did to my husband." She moved to the window again, noting increased activity at the compound's perimeter. The marshals were beginning their approach, using the natural cover of the surrounding forest to close in undetected. Most would be on foot, having left their horses at a safe distance to minimize noise. "Your men are about to face a choice," she told the captured raiders. "Surrender or die. Given their condition, surrender would be wiser." Outside, the first shout of alarm came from the northern sentry. "Post!" A single gunshot echoed across the compound, followed by the distinctive sound of a rifle misfire and a scream of pain. Eleanor's ammunition sabotage had claimed its first victim. "What did you do to our guns?" Wade demanded, horror dawning on his face. "Applied basic chemistry to your percussion caps," Eleanor explained dispassionately. "The compound destabilizes when heated by firing, causing catastrophic failure. Quite effective." The compound erupted into chaotic activity as marshals appeared at multiple points simultaneously. More gunshots, more misfires, men shouting contradictory orders, the disciplined criminal organization that had terrorized the territory for years collapsed into panicked individuals concerned only with personal survival. "Marshal Harrington planned this assault based on my intelligence," Eleanor informed her captives as she watched the raid unfold. "He knows which men are incapacitated by illness, which entry points are vulnerable, where weapons are stored. Your men never had a chance." Through the window, she observed raiders emerging from buildings with hands raised, too sick or too scared to resist. Others attempted to fight, but found their weapons unreliable or their positions compromised. The marshals moved with coordinated efficiency, securing prisoners and buildings in a methodical sweep. A sharp series of knocks on the cabin door signaled the arrival of friendly forces. "Federal marshals!" called a commanding voice. "Anyone!" "Inside, identify yourself, Eleanor Blackwood," she responded clearly. "I have Jackson Raven and Samuel Wade secured." The door opened to reveal Marshal James Harrington, a tall figure with steel-grey hair and the hardened expression of a man who had spent decades pursuing justice in lawless territories. "Mrs. Blackwood," he acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Your signal was received clearly. The compound is nearly secured." Eleanor gestured to her prisoners. "These are the leaders. The chest by the bed contains all their records, every operation, every bribed official, every murder." Harrington signaled to deputies waiting outside, who entered to take charge of the prisoners. "Any resistance?" he asked, surveying the cabin. "None significant," Eleanor replied. "Most were incapacitated as planned." Jackson looked up as the deputies pulled him to his feet. "You should hire this woman, Marshal," he suggested with grim humor. She's dismantled in one night what took me years to build. Mrs. Blackwood's assistance has been invaluable, Harrington agreed, watching as the prisoners were led away, though her methods are somewhat unconventional for federal work. When they were alone, Harrington's formal demeanor softened slightly. Eleanor, this was masterfully executed, but you took unnecessary risks. We could have moved against them. Without your infiltration, Eleanor shook her head, your frontal assault would have cost lives, theirs and yours. My way ensured minimal casualties while securing maximum evidence. She moved to the chest, extracting key documents she had identified. During the night, these pages detail Sheriff Mills' involvement. He's been on their payroll for 3 years, helping cover up murders, including my husband's. Harrington accepted the papers with a grim expression. Mills won't escape justice. I've already dispatched men to Whispering Pines to take him into custody. There's more, Eleanor continued, her voice hardening. Mills took personal items from Thomas's body, items that weren't logged as evidence. I want them recovered. Consider it done. Harrington hesitated, studying her with concerned eyes. What will you do now, Eleanor? The agency would welcome you back. Your skills haven't diminished. Eleanor turned to the window, watching as the rising sun illuminated the captured raider compound. For the first time in a year, the weight of her vendetta lifted, leaving unexpected emptiness in its wake. I don't know, she admitted quietly. Everything since Thomas died has been focused on this moment. I haven't considered what comes after. You could rebuild, Harrington suggested gently. Your homestead is still yours. The territory is changing, becoming more civilized. There will be opportunities for someone with your abilities. Eleanor considered this as she gathered the remaining evidence. The methodical planning that had consumed her for a year was complete. Justice had been served, vengeance taken. The widow had sprung her final trap, and the men who murdered her husband would face the law they had so long evaded. By midday, the compound was fully secured. 23 raiders in custody, their criminal empire dismantled, their records providing evidence that would lead to arrests throughout the territory. Eleanor stood on the ridge overlooking the hollow, watching as wagons were prepared to transport prisoners to the territorial capital for trial. We found something you might want, Deputy Marshal Collins approached, holding a small leather pouch. Hidden in Wade's quarters, Eleanor opened it with careful fingers to find Thomas's pocket watch, still bearing the inscription she had given him on their wedding day. The simple gold band he had worn alongside it was also present, along with the small notebook he had carried everywhere. Thank you, she whispered, the professional detachment she had maintained throughout her operation finally cracking as she clutched these remnants of her husband. Harrington joined her at the overlook as the prisoner wagons began their journey. Jackson Raven will hang, he stated matter-of-factly. So will Wade and at least 5 others. The rest will serve substantial prison terms. And Mills? Eleanor asked, slipping Thomas's ring onto a chain around her neck. Being brought in as we speak. His deputy actually seemed relieved. Apparently Mills has been increasingly erratic since your husband's death. Guilty conscience, perhaps. Eleanor nodded absently, her thoughts already turning to what would come next. The vengeance that had sustained her was complete, but Thomas was still gone. The home they had built together stood empty. The future they had planned remained unrealized. I'm heading back to my property, she decided, straightening her shoulders. There's much to repair after the raiders' visit. I'll provide an escort, Harrington offered. Eleanor smiled faintly. I believe I've demonstrated I can handle myself, Marshal. Indisputably, he conceded, but protocol demands protection for key witnesses until trials are concluded. The journey back to Whispering Pines took most of the day, giving Eleanor time to process all that had occurred. The elaborate trap network she had created, the careful manipulation of the raiders, the final dismantling of their organization, all executed with precision born from her years of Pinkerton training. Yet the satisfaction she had anticipated felt hollow compared to the grief that remained. As they approached her homestead, Eleanor was surprised to see smoke rising from the chimney. Her hand moved instinctively to her concealed derringer before Harrington placed a restraining hand on her arm. "I took the liberty of sending word ahead," he explained. "Some of the town's women have been preparing your home." Indeed, as they reached the cabin, Eleanor found Mrs. Peterson from the general store sweeping the porch. While inside, the minister's wife had prepared a hot meal. Others had repaired damage from the raiders' intrusion, brought fresh supplies, and even placed wildflowers on the table. "We should have done more to help after Thomas passed," Mrs. Peterson explained, embarrassment coloring her weathered cheeks. "But truth be told, Mills scared folks into keeping their distance, said you wanted to be left alone." Eleanor accepted their help with quiet gratitude, recognizing in their gestures something she had forgotten existed. Community, connection, the simple kindness of neighbors looking after one another. That evening, after the townspeople and marshals had departed, leaving only 2 deputies posted discreetly at the property's edge, Eleanor sat alone on her porch. Thomas's watch rested in her palm, its steady ticking a reminder of time continuing despite all losses. She opened his notebook, finding sketches of improvements he had planned for their home, notes about cattle breeding, and on the final pages, a letter addressed to her that he had never completed. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then my fears about what I witnessed may have proven justified. I know you'll blame yourself for agreeing to leave our former life behind, for believing we could simply walk away from who we were. Don't. These years with you, building something honest with our own hands, have been worth whatever price I might pay. I go to speak with Mills tomorrow, despite your concerns. Perhaps I'm naive to still believe in the law we once served, but if we surrender that belief entirely, then what was the purpose of all we sacrificed? If the worst happens, promise me this. Remember that vengeance is a poison that consumes. It's a vessel. You are more than the skills the agency honed in you. You are the woman who taught me to see beauty in this harsh landscape, who laughs at creek beds filled with wildflowers, who still whistles in her sleep. Whatever comes, know that the letter ended there unfinished. Eleanor traced his handwriting with gentle fingers, tears falling freely for the first time since his death. The tactical brilliance that had allowed her to dismantle the Raven Creek raiders had not prepared her for this final message from beyond the grave, her husband's gentle rebuke of the vengeance she had so meticulously enacted. As darkness settled over the valley, Eleanor rocked slowly on the porch, holding Thomas's incomplete letter against her heart. The trap setter had sprung her final trap. Justice had been served, but the question of what came next remained unanswered. In the distance, coyotes called to one another across the moonlit landscape. New calves would arrive in the spring. The orchard Thomas had planted would need tending. Life, stubbornly persistent, continued its forward march. Eleanor Blackwood, widow and vengeance seeker, had completed her mission. Now perhaps Eleanor Blackwood, homesteader and survivor, could begin hers. 3 months after the destruction of the Raven Creek raiders, Whispering Pines had transformed. Spring breathed vibrant life into the Montana territory, painting the valley with wildflowers and fresh growth. The town itself experienced a different kind of rebirth. Commerce flourished without the raiders' extortion. New families arrived, weakly to stake claims on land once considered too dangerous to settle, and a palpable sense of security replaced the former atmosphere of quiet terror. Eleanor Blackwood's role in this transformation remained officially unacknowledged. Marshal Harrington's reports credited confidential informants and strategic federal operations for the raiders' downfall. Yet unofficial stories spread through whispered conversations and admiring glances whenever Eleanor visited town for supplies. On this particular morning, Eleanor rode her chestnut mare down the main street, nodding politely to townspeople who greeted her with newfound respect. The general store's weather-beaten exterior had received a fresh coat of white paint, and a newly constructed schoolhouse stood where once only an empty lot had existed. "Mrs. Blackwood," called Joseph Miller, the town's newly appointed mayor, "a moment of your time, if you please." Eleanor reined her horse to a stop, studying Miller with habitual assessment. A former freight company manager from Helena, Miller, had arrived with his family shortly after news of the raiders' capture spread throughout the territory. His initiative and organizational skills had quickly elevated him to leadership. "Mayor Miller," she acknowledged, "the town's looking prosperous." "Indeed it is," he agreed, pride evident in his voice. "Safety brings opportunity, which is actually what I hoped to discuss with you." Eleanor dismounted, securing her horse to the hitching post. "I'm listening." Miller glanced around the busy street before continuing in a lower voice. "The town council is forming a permanent security committee. With the territorial marshal's office stretched thin, we need local citizens with—" He searched for appropriate phrasing. "Relevant experience." A wry smile touched Eleanor's lips. "And you believe I have such experience?" "Mrs. Blackwood," Miller replied with surprising directness, "we all know who really brought down the raiders. Marshal Harrington may maintain official silence, but men talk, especially deputies who witnessed your handiwork firsthand." Eleanor considered his words, surprised by the unexpected offer. Since completing her vendetta, she had focused solely on restoring her homestead, repairing damage, tending livestock, maintaining the isolated existence she and Thomas had established. The possibility of engaging with the community hadn't occurred to her. "I'm not seeking public recognition," she cautioned. "Nor are we offering it," Miller assured her. "This would be advisory only, helping establish protocols, training our volunteer deputies, perhaps consulting on matters requiring more specialized assessment." Before Eleanor could respond, commotion erupted further down the street. A.K. Freight wagon had arrived, drawing a crowd of excited townspeople. But unlike the usual supply deliveries, this one carried passengers, women in practical but city-made clothing, disembarking with bundles of possessions and expressions mixing apprehension with determination. "Ah, they've arrived," Miller noted, with satisfaction. "The first group of widows from the Eastern Relief Society." Eleanor watched with interest as 7 women of varying ages were welcomed by the waiting townspeople. "Eastern Relief Society?" Miller nodded. "A charity organization helping war widows and those who lost husbands in industrial accidents. They arrange relocation to territories seeking women of good character for teaching, nursing, and potential remarriage." The organized nature of the arrival and the practical purpose behind it appealed to Eleanor's strategic mind. Sensible solution to multiple problems. "Precisely," Miller agreed. "The war left too many widows in eastern cities with limited prospects, while territories like ours have too few women to establish proper communities." He hesitated before adding, "I understand such programs might seem calculating, but these women chose this opportunity. Many are quite accomplished in their own rights." Eleanor observed the new arrivals with professional assessment. Unlike the fragile, helpless creatures one might expect, these women showed resilience in their straight postures and practical handling of their belongings. They had already endured tragedy and chosen to rebuild their lives in a challenging environment, qualities Eleanor inherently respected. "They'll need proper housing until they're settled," she noted. Miller brightened at her interest. "Indeed, we've prepared the old Donovan place for temporary accommodation, but it's hardly adequate. If someone with experience in homesteading could advise them on territorial practicalities." Eleanor recognized. His transparent attempt to recruit her involvement, but found herself unexpectedly amenable. Thomas's final letter had been weighing on her mind, his gentle admonishment against allowing vengeance to consume her identity. Perhaps this represented an opportunity to honor his wish that she find purpose beyond retribution. "I'll stop. By tomorrow," she decided. "See what assistance I might offer." Miller's relief was palpable. "Excellent. I'm sure they'd welcome any guidance, especially from someone who has successfully established herself independently." As Eleanor completed her errands and prepared to return to her homestead, she found herself studying the new arrivals with increased curiosity. One woman in particular caught her attention, tall, auburn-haired, directing the unloading of supplies, with efficiency that suggested organizational experience. "That's Dr. Catherine Bennett," offered Mrs. Peterson, following Eleanor's gaze. "A proper physician from Boston, can you imagine? Lost her husband at Antietam and continued his medical practice afterward. We're blessed to have someone with her. Training here." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, impressed despite herself. Female physicians remained rare even in eastern cities. Finding one willing to practice in a frontier settlement was extraordinary. "The town needs medical expertise," Eleanor acknowledged. Her years with the Pinkertons had taught her the value of competent medical care in remote locations. "Desperately," Mrs. Peterson agreed. "No more relying on veterinarians and midwives. For serious ailments, she's already arranged to use the back room of the apothecary as a proper examining space." Throughout her ride home, Eleanor found her thoughts returning to the new arrivals and Miller's invitation to join the security committee. For months, she had focused exclusively on her homestead, avoiding deeper connections with Whispering Pines. It had seemed appropriate, the solitary widow maintaining her independence. Yet Thomas's unfinished letter had unsettled that certainty. The following morning, Eleanor packed her wagon with practical offerings, preserved food, extra quilts, and a crate of seedlings from her garden. Territorial winters required extensive preparation, knowledge the eastern widows would need quickly. The Donovan place sat at the edge of town, a sprawling former boarding house abandoned after its owner joined the raiders years earlier. Its weathered clapboard exterior had been recently repaired, though the surrounding yard remained untamed. As Eleanor approached, she noted several women already at work, establishing garden plots in the most favorable locations. Dr. Bennett looked up from marking planting rows, shading her eyes against the morning sun. "You must be Mrs. Blackwood," she called, straightening to her full height. "Mayor Miller mentioned you might visit." Eleanor nodded, assessing the physician with practiced observation. Up close, Catherine Bennett appeared to be in her mid-30s, with intelligent eyes and capable hands that showed both the refinement of education and the practical calluses of hard work. "I've brought some essentials," Eleanor explained, gesturing to her wagon, "and seedlings that thrive in this soil." "Most welcome," Dr. Bennett replied, approaching to inspect the offerings. "We've each brought knowledge and skills, but local expertise is invaluable." As they unloaded the supplies, Eleanor found herself unexpectedly engaged by Dr. Bennett's practical questions and evident competence. Unlike many educated Easterners, she sought information without condescension, acknowledging the specialized knowledge required for frontier survival. "You've established a successful homestead alone," Dr. Bennett observed as they carried seedlings to the newly prepared garden. "An impressive achievement in this territory." "My husband and I built it together," Eleanor corrected. "I've merely maintained it since his passing." Dr. Bennett nodded, understanding in her expression. Maintaining is often harder than building. Creation happens in moments of passion and purpose. Preservation requires daily commitment through grief and doubt. The insight revealed unexpected depth, reminding Eleanor that she wasn't the only woman who had rebuilt a life from tragedy. "You speak from experience." "As do you," Dr. Bennett replied simply. "We all carry our histories, Mrs. Blackwood. The question is whether we allow them to define our futures. Throughout the day, Eleanor found herself drawn into the widow's establishment efforts, offering practical advice on everything from water conservation to predator deterrence. These women weren't helpless pioneers, but capable individuals, applying their existing skills to new circumstances. Their collective approach to challenges reminded her of operational teams she'd worked with at the agency, each contributing specialized expertise toward common objectives. As evening approached, Eleanor prepared to return to her homestead, when Dr. Bennett approached with an unexpected request. "Mrs. Blackwood, I understand you have medical knowledge beyond most settlers," she said quietly. "Mrs. Peterson mentioned your skill with treating wounds and preparing remedies." Eleanor tensed slightly, wondering how much the townspeople had pieced together about her background. "I have some experience," she acknowledged cautiously. "I'm establishing proper medical services here," Dr. Bennett continued, "but my training was primarily in formal settings with appropriate supplies. Your knowledge of local treatments using available resources would be invaluable." "I'm not a physician," Eleanor cautioned. "No, but you're a survivor who has kept herself alive in conditions where others perished." Dr. Bennett's direct gaze conveyed a sincere respect. "I'm proposing an exchange of knowledge, my formal training complemented by your practical experience." The proposition was unexpected but logical. Eleanor had accumulated considerable medical knowledge during her Pinkerton years, often working in locations without access to proper physicians. That expertise, combined with Thomas's interest in native plant remedies, had created a valuable repository of healing knowledge. "I'll consider it," Eleanor replied, not yet ready to commit to regular engagement with the town. Dr. Bennett smiled, knowingly. "That's all I ask. We're at the Donovan place when you decide." The ride home gave Eleanor time to contemplate the day's interactions. For months after completing her vendetta, she had maintained isolation, focusing solely on the physical labor of running her homestead. The intense purpose that had driven her strategic dismantling of the raiders had been replaced by simple survival routines, leaving an emptiness she'd been reluctant to acknowledge. As she crested the final ridge overlooking her property, Eleanor reined her horses to a stop, taking in the landscape with fresh perspective. The cabin she and Thomas had built stood solid against the backdrop of mountains. Fields they had cleared together showed promising spring growth. The orchard he had lovingly planted was beginning to blossom. Yet the scene highlighted her solitude. A homestead built for family life, occupied by a single woman whose purpose had been fulfilled with the raiders' destruction. Thomas's incomplete letter rested in her pocket, carried daily since its discovery. Eleanor retrieved it now, reading again his gentle admonishment against allowing vengeance to consume her identity. "You are more than the skills the agency honed in you." The following weeks brought gradual change to Eleanor's carefully ordered existence. Twice weekly, she visited town to exchange knowledge with Dr. Bennett, teaching frontier remedies while learning formal medical techniques. The arrangement benefited both women, Catherine gaining practical applications for her training, Eleanor refining skills that had previously been developed through necessity rather than instruction. Their professional collaboration evolved into something unexpected: friendship. Despite different backgrounds, both women shared analytical minds, practical approaches to problems, and experiences rebuilding lives after profound loss. "You never considered returning east after your husband's death?" Eleanor asked one afternoon, as they catalogued medicinal plants collected from the surrounding hills. Catherine carefully labeled a specimen before answering. Boston held nothing but memories and limitations. As a widow practicing medicine, I constantly fought skepticism and prejudice. Here, necessity overrides convention. People care more about competence than propriety. The observation resonated with Eleanor's own experience. The territory judges actions rather than history. Precisely, Catherine agreed, though I suspect, even here, there are aspects of your history that might raise eyebrows. The comment, delivered without judgment, nonetheless caused Eleanor to tense. What exactly do you think you know about me, Dr. Bennett? Catherine met her gaze steadily. I know you're a woman with specialized training far beyond homesteading skills. I know you observe rooms like someone assessing threats and exits. I know your knowledge of injuries includes those typically sustained in violent confrontation rather than farming accidents. Eleanor remained silent, neither confirming nor denying these observations. I also know, Catherine continued gently, that whatever your past, you've used those skills to make this community safer. The details matter less than the results. The acceptance implicit in this statement stirred something Eleanor had long suppressed, the desire for honest connection without the constant maintenance of cover identities. For years at the agency, then during her marriage to Thomas, and finally throughout her vendetta against the raiders, she had carefully controlled what others knew of her true capabilities. My husband believed in new beginnings, Eleanor said, finally. In the possibility of defining ourselves by current choices rather than past actions. A wise perspective, Catherine replied. One I share. She hesitated before adding, the women at the Donovan house are hosting a small gathering. Tomorrow evening. Nothing elaborate, just shared food and company. You would be welcome. The invitation represented more than a social occasion. It offered community, connection, the possibility of belonging. Eleanor had not attended such gatherings since Thomas's death, maintaining the isolation appropriate to her grief and necessary for her vendetta. I might stop by, she said non-committally, though something in Catherine's knowing smile suggested her acceptance was already understood. The following evening found Eleanor approaching the Donovan house with uncharacteristic uncertainty. She had spent more time than usual selecting appropriate attire, choosing a dress Thomas had always favored rather than her usual practical clothing. The small basket of preserves she carried seemed inadequate, yet she reminded herself that social gatherings operated by different rules than tactical operations. The house glowed with lamplight, voices and laughter spilling from open windows into the warm spring evening. Through the front window, Eleanor observed a scene of simple community. Women of varying ages engaged in conversation, sharing food and experiences. The evident camaraderie gave her momentary pause, highlighting how thoroughly she had isolated herself since Thomas's death. Before she could reconsider her decision, Catherine appeared at the door. I thought I heard someone arrive, she said warmly. Please join us. The evening unfolded with unexpected ease. Eleanor found herself welcomed without pressure or excessive curiosity. These women had all experienced loss and rebuilding. They respected privacy while offering connection on mutually acceptable terms. As the gathering concluded, Mayor Miller arrived to escort several women back to accommodations in town. He approached Eleanor with evident pleasure. Mrs. Blackwood, delighted you could attend. I've been hoping to follow up on our conversation about the security committee. Eleanor hesitated, but found her reflexive refusal had softened. Perhaps we could discuss details next week. Miller's eyebrows rose slightly at this unexpected openness. Certainly. The committee meets Tuesday afternoons at the town hall. Your expertise would be invaluable. Later, as Eleanor prepared to depart, Catherine walked her to her wagon. You seem lighter tonight, she observed, more present. Eleanor considered this assessment. Perhaps I'm finally hearing what my husband tried to tell me in his final letter, which was that vengeance, while temporarily satisfying, makes a poor foundation for living. Eleanor gazed toward the town, now peaceful in the moonlight. He believed in building something meaningful rather than merely destroying what was wrong. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. Wise counsel. And what meaningful thing might you build now, Eleanor Blackwood? The question lingered as Eleanor rode home. Through the quiet night, the trap-setter had completed her vengeance, dismantling the threat with tactical precision. Now perhaps the builder could emerge, the woman who had once believed in creating something worthwhile with her own hands, her own heart. As her homestead came into view, Eleanor noticed the blossoms on Thomas's orchard glowing silver in the moonlight. New growth, new fruit, new possibilities, emerging from what he had planted with hope. Something meaningful, she whispered to the night. An answer to Catherine's question and a promise to Thomas's memory. Not merely survival, not simply existence, but genuine living, connected to this land and its people through choice rather than strategy. The trap-setter's work was complete. The builder's work was just beginning. Autumn painted the Montana, territory in rich amber and crimson, transforming the landscape as whispering pines prepared for its first Founders' Day celebration. 6 months had passed since the raiders' defeat, and the town had flourished beyond anyone's expectations. New buildings lined the expanded main street, a proper courthouse neared completion, and the population had nearly doubled with families, seeking the security and opportunity now abundant in the region. Eleanor Blackwood surveyed the festivities from her position near the newly constructed bandstand. Children darted between food tables while musicians tuned their instruments for the evening dance. The celebration marked not only the town's renewal, but also commemorated those lost to the raiders during their years of terror. A memorial plaque bearing 23 names, Thomas Blackwood's among them, had been unveiled that morning at the town square. "Quite a transformation," observed Catherine Bennett, joining Eleanor with 2 cups of cider. "Hard to believe this is the same place." Eleanor accepted the offered drink, noting how comfortable their friendship had become. The town needed only security to thrive. People are remarkably resilient when not living under constant threat. Speaking of security, Catherine nodded toward the group of men wearing deputy badges, carefully positioned throughout the gathering. "Your training program seems effective." Over the summer, Eleanor had reluctantly assumed leadership of the town's security committee, implementing systems drawn from her Pinkerton experience. Volunteer deputies now patrolled established routes, communication protocols connected outlying. Homesteads and strategic defense positions had been established around the town's perimeter. What had begun as temporary consultation had evolved into a permanent role that utilized her unique skills for community protection rather than personal vengeance. "They're learning," Eleanor acknowledged. "Garrison shows particular promise." Before Catherine could respond, Mayor Miller approached with an official-looking gentleman in an expensive Eastern suit. "Mrs. Blackwood, Dr. Bennett," Miller greeted them enthusiastically. "May I present Mr. Edwards from the Territorial Governor's Office? He's been most impressed with our town's remarkable progress." Edwards bowed slightly. "Ladies, I've heard much about you both. The governor has taken personal interest in Whispering Pines as a model for territorial development." Eleanor assessed the government representative with habitual thoroughness. His clothing suggested authority, but the calluses on his hands revealed a practical background beyond political appointments. "The governor is considering Whispering Pines as the location for the new Northern Judicial District," Edwards continued. "Your security infrastructure is particularly noteworthy, Mrs. Blackwood. Most settlements rely solely on federal marshals who might be weeks away when needed." Eleanor maintained a neutral expression, despite her surprise. "We simply applied practical solutions to specific challenges with remarkable results," Edwards countered. The governor would like to implement similar systems throughout the territory. He's authorized me to offer you a position as security administrator for the northern counties." The unexpected proposal momentarily silenced Eleanor. 6 months earlier, she had reluctantly agreed to advise the town's makeshift security committee. Now, a territorial official was offering professional recognition of her capabilities, legitimizing skills she had used in shadow operations for most of her adult life. "A substantial opportunity," Catherine noted, observing Eleanor's hesitation, "though I imagine it would require frequent travel away from your homestead." The practical consideration anchored Eleanor's thoughts. The proposal was flattering, utilizing her strategic abilities in official capacity rather than covert operations. Yet it would draw her away from the home she and Thomas had built, the legitimate life they had chosen together. "I appreciate the governor's confidence," Eleanor replied carefully. "However, my commitments lie here. The systems we've developed can be documented and shared without requiring my personal oversight elsewhere." Edward seemed prepared for her response. "The governor anticipated your reluctance to leave Whispering Pines. He's authorized an alternative, establishing the Territorial Security Training Academy here, with you as its director. Deputies from throughout the region would train under your supervision." This modified proposal resonated more deeply with Eleanor's evolving sense of purpose. Training others to protect their communities would honor Thomas's belief in legitimate justice while utilizing her specialized knowledge. "I'll consider it," she conceded, noting Catherine's approving smile. As evening approached, lanterns illuminated the town square, where musicians struck up lively tunes for dancing. Eleanor watched from the periphery as townsfolk celebrated their new beginning. Families who had arrived after the raiders' defeat, dancing alongside those who had survived their reign of terror. A visible testament to resilience and renewal. "Not joining the festivities?" Sheriff Garrison asked, approaching with respectful deference. The former freight driver had proven an apt pupil in Eleanor's security training, eventually earning election as the town's first proper sheriff. "I'm more effective observing," Eleanor replied, her attention continuously scanning for potential disruptions despite the peaceful gathering. "Always vigilant," Garrison noted with understanding. "Marshal Harrington sent word Jackson Raven's hanging is scheduled for next month in Helena. The territorial prosecutor wants to know if you'll testify." Eleanor considered the request, surprised by her own detachment. The man responsible for Thomas's death would face justice. Yet the burning need for personal vengeance that had consumed her for a year had been replaced by something quieter but more substantial. The written evidence should be sufficient, she decided. "My presence isn't necessary," Garrison nodded, understanding the significance of her choice. Mills broke down completely during questioning. "Confessed to removing your husband's belongings after finding his body, said Raven had him in debt so deep he couldn't refuse when they ordered him to rule it an accident." The confirmation of Mills's corruption validated Eleanor's suspicions, yet brought no particular satisfaction. Justice was proceeding through legitimate channels, exactly as Thomas would have wanted. As the celebration continued, Eleanor slipped away from the crowds, making her way toward the memorial plaque at the edge of the square. Her fingers traced Thomas's name among the others, remembering the quiet man who had believed they could leave their shadowed past for an honest future. "He would be proud," Catherine said softly, joining her at the memorial. "Not of the vengeance, perhaps, but of what you've built afterward." Eleanor considered this assessment. "He always saw possibilities where I saw only threats. It took me too long to understand his vision." "Yet you've honored it," Catherine observed. "This town exists in its current form because you channeled your skills toward protection rather than merely retribution." The insight resonated with Eleanor's own evolving understanding. the tactical brilliance that had allowed her to dismantle. The raiders now served to build security systems for vulnerable communities. The observational skills honed in covert operations now trained others to protect their homes. "I've received an offer from the Denver Medical College," Catherine revealed after a comfortable silence. "They're establishing a department focused on frontier medicine and want me to lead their field research." Eleanor felt an unexpected pang at the thought of her friend's departure, an appropriate recognition of your expertise. "I've proposed an alternative arrangement," Catherine continued. "A research outpost here, using Whispering Pines as a base for documenting frontier medical practices throughout the region. Similar to the governor's modified proposal for me," Eleanor noted with understanding. "Great minds," Catherine agreed with a small smile. "We've both found purpose here that we didn't anticipate." Later that night, as Eleanor returned to her homestead, under a canopy of stars, she reflected on the transformation of the past 6 months. The trap-setter who had meticulously planned the raiders' destruction had evolved into something Thomas would have recognized, a builder of systems that protected rather than merely avenged. At her cabin, Eleanor lit the lamp and removed Thomas's incomplete letter from the carved box where she now kept it. The words that had once brought pain now offered comfort. "You are more than the skills the agency honed in you." She had proven him right, though not in the way either of them had imagined. The skills themselves weren't the problem, only their application. The same strategic thinking that had made her an effective operative now protected communities. The same attention to detail that had made her a feared investigator now trained others to maintain vigilance. Outside, an owl called from the orchard Thomas had planted. The trees had yielded their first proper harvest this autumn. Tangible, proof that patience and care produced results violence never could. Eleanor placed the letter back in its box and stepped onto the porch, gazing across the moonlit property that had been their dream and was now her legacy. The trap-setter had completed her work. The builder would continue hers. The widow had become something new, not defined by vengeance or loss, but by the community she had chosen to protect and the future she now helped to shape. Eleanor Blackwood had set her last trap and caught something unexpected, a life worth living. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.